I am very happy to introduce you to my co-host, Petra Butler, Professor Petra Butler, from New Zealand. So give her a big warm applause. From New Zealand, she really came over to this conference. And now Petra is the host of the next panel. Petra, it's up to you.
Thank you, Katharina, and thank you, everybody, for coming. And it's a great honor to be here. So I think we have a panel which actually follows fantastically from our first keynote and actually to a certain degree also from our second panel, or first panel. And Marlene introduced us what lawyers actually think about AI and blockchain. So we will put this a little bit to the test. And what we have here and what you see is one endeavor to actually have an entire platform and coming up with a system, how we can put everything from contract formation up into the dispute resolution of a contract onto one system. And that's what we're going to discuss with my two fantastic, experienced panelists, and I will get them to introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Crenguta Leaua. I'm a law professor. I teach international arbitration and new technologies law. Basically, blockchain AI, this is my field, but from the perspective of law. I also have an education on economics of the blockchain and disruptive technologies. And I'm working also as an expert for the dispute resolution for technology-related topics with the United Nations Commissions for International Trade. And that, I think, it's relevant for today.
Hi, I'm Steve Finzio, and after hearing Crenguta describe her knowledge, I'm going to leave. I'm a dispute resolution lawyer. I'm an American lawyer. I always think when we talk about lawyers, it's useful to say what system you come out of. I focus on dispute resolution, and in particular on international arbitration. I teach international arbitration. I know very little about blockchain and AI, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here. And was here last year is to learn about it because it is transforming what we do. And if you join our workshop this afternoon, Petra and I are thinking about how you use blockchain and AI to help small states, which is something that we focus on. But I'm here in part to give the layperson's perspective on how technology is being used and how it can be used related to legal issues ranging from contracting, but in particular, dispute resolution.
Thank you. Looking at this idea that has been developed by two colleagues of ours who unfortunately couldn't come because they didn't get a visa. So their idea was to have a platform where users would start actually negotiating a contract. And we heard Marlene say around contract drafting and analysis and saying that might not work. So I would like to start probably with Crenguta, what you think about contract drafting and negotiation, having a platform where you just basically say, I want a contract for sale of goods or services. Would a platform actually support that contract formation?
Okay, so I would go back to the very basic question. What is a contract formation? It's a meeting of wills. I mean, two people or a number of people that are expressing what they want. Okay, so you have to have two characteristics. One is to have a consent that is coming from a person, and that is one issue. I mean, for instance, legally, you cannot express your consent through a dog. Your dog cannot buy you a paper, although it can go to the, paper shop. I mean, the newspaper shop, and be there and carrying it on. Okay. So, question is, can an AI consent for you? That's one topic. And then the second is, it has to be a consent for something that you are very much aware of. I mean, it's a consent that is expressed for something that is very clear. If not, it won't be legally valid. It will have some flaws, like for instance, you're in error. You have some misconceptions. You are in a misunderstanding as to what is exactly that you're consenting for. Now, where the problem is that if you go on platforms, more of the platforms have this kind of consent expressed by ticking the box. When you tick a box, how many of you are reading the full text that you're ticking that you have read? How many? Oh, how many of you are reading at least half of it? Okay. Which of you, when reading it, are looking at the entity with whom you're entering into a contract with? I am, and I'm going to tell you why. You know what? Most of the sites do not have that reference. So you're entering into a contract with somebody that is not clearly described. Usually you find the description only in the policies, like for instance, confidentiality policy. On the platform itself, the company that you're entering in the contract with is described as the company, with brackets, and that's it. So my question to you is, on a platform, can you have the certitude that you're a human, or the other one, it's a human. Second, with whom you're contracting. And third, that your consent is an informed one. Now, these are vulnerabilities of platforms. I'm challenging the discussion with this.
I'll make some basic observations. I think your dog has come to argue about whether they can make decisions. The question about whether these sorts of platforms are useful, I think that there's an obvious answer, which is yes. In the sense that at a basic level, what these sorts of platforms do is to provide information about forms of contracts, forms of data, so that you have people who, particularly who may not have the resources to get access, have an easy way to find reliable forms. But that's a very, very basic benefit, which is to get a form that's a useful form. The next questions, and certainly the questions of consent, become much more complex. But I think we should start by saying there is a value to providing access to workable forms, and to provide information to people to say, if you want to do a certain type of contract, here are forms that work. Then you can start to negotiate, then you can start to talk about consent. The question is, how far do we use the system to negotiate for you? How much are we using systems? And this is where some of these systems are going, is to say, tell the system what you want, and it not only will tell you, here's some forms, it will start to move you into versions that try to accomplish your goals, and then you get to the more complicated layer of consent. And I think with all of this, because we could talk about this for a long time, and I want to give Petra the microphone back, when you're thinking about using these systems, not only are there questions about, does it get you to where you want to be, because most of these systems are looking at existing forms, right? So if you want to do something new, can the system help you with something new, or is it telling you what people usually do? And at some point, is telling you what people usually do, that's sort of looking at past examples to decide what you should do, does that become a form of limitation? So thinking about that is an issue. And I think the other two issues are what are we trying to accomplish in the end? Are we trying to create something that is enforceable? And what do we do if there's a dispute about it? And how does the system work to get you there? Now, obviously, the more you have reliable documentation as a basic, and that's getting you to a better position if there's a dispute, if there's uncertainty, it gives you predictability, it gives you more certainty because you have reliable documentation. So I think the great benefit of these systems is starting with clearer documentation, as long as they don't look like those click agreements that are 17 pages long in tiny print that don't make any sense. And I didn't raise my hand at all because I'm a lawyer and I can't understand any of those forms. And I live in the world that we all live in, which is a coercive. You have to click that form to get access to something you need to use basic functions on your phone. So you have no choice but to click. And frankly, I find it useless to read them because even if I know who I'm contracting with, what difference does it make? I have no choice in the matter. So if these systems get you to forms that are more understandable and more well-suited to the problem you're trying to solve, I think the basic answer is, of course, this is helpful.
You have noted by now that we are playing good cop, bad cop, okay? So that means that at some point in time you will have to form your self-conviction, and that personal conviction of yours will guide your behavior in the future. So me challenging with the bad cop thinking is the following. We have 3 systems of consent because consent is extremely important. Imagine that nowadays we have material goods that we are selling, but in the future we are going to sell tokenized versions of them. For instance, my house will be sent from my ownership to somebody else's through a change of ownership through a token based on blockchain, at least in some markets. So if that is the importance of the consent that can be, clicked, we have 3 systems of ensuring that that consent is made with mental clarity and understanding from the person. One is the ticking the box, which is the easiest possible, where you do not care about the consent itself. You just care about having the proof that the other person was in that agreement on whatever terms that agreement is. So what does it mean? It means that the consumers, the people that are entering into those contracts do not care enough to complain about that. They are just betting their legal relationship, and that is a very clear system in which a person do not care about the law. It cares only about the protections that are given to that person, but not by contract, but by law, and that's it. So they are just betting on the state, that it will enforce whatever rights that person has. It trusts the state. And that goes for a system that is state-based for enforcement. If you're on on-chain enforcement, and this is a blockchain system, you will have most likely an automated enforcement in which you will have no state authority intervening into that enforcement. So your money will be taken out from your bank account by an automated version of this enforcement of the contract if you agree with it. And all of you who have, for instance, by now already, an app that you downloaded, and you tick the box for the consent, and then your Google Pay, it keep on taking money from you every month until you are managing somehow to discover where you have to, deregister, unsubscribe to that. And to end, the other 2 systems, other than tick the box, is to express your consent by, writing a text. I agree for the specific amount of, and this in some legal system is expressly requested. So not only the signature, but I agree with this, like handwriting. For instance, French system, and not only. And the last one is the one in which you go to a person who's testifying that you were willfully consenting. That usually it's a public notary. And to be very clear, for instance, in Switzerland, when I signed a paper for an apartment, the notary public not only that asked me if I read the document, he read the document to me out loud, every single word of it. It took me 2 hours to read it. And it said it is by law, because they want to make sure that on issues of such importance like an apartment, you have to make sure that the person understood. Now, can you do that on a platform? Can you have a robot reading it to you? Can your eye moves be, contacted that you are looking at the specific text? Maybe you can do what the notary is doing, namely give you a test. Have you understood? Yes. Tell me, what is the price again? This is the price. Okay. So you do like a quiz at the end. Have you understood what you're going to sign, and sign only what afterwards? Just food for thought.
Well, no, I think consent is a really critical issue. And I was thinking about, using this platform as a model. What I'm thinking more about is the phase 1 and first part of phase 2, because I think this reflects a progress. This reflects using technology to get us to more reliable starting points. And the reality is, if you say, well, this is for people who don't have the resources necessarily to hire the best law firms, what we're hearing about, and Marlene talked about this a little bit already, is the best law firms are using the same sort of technology to do the drafts and clause library to prepare these documents anyway. So I think this is where the world has gone. So the question I think that Crenguta is talking about is this signature point when you say yes, and how we manage that. And I think we could separate these 2 issues out. Do you want some form of automated yes, or some form of a stop and requiring you to have more ability to interrogate the decision before you make it, which then also leads to the question of enforceability legally. If you have questions about whether consent was valid, and I jokingly talked about coercion when I talked about click agreements, and there are systems in which they are not enforceable because they are signed under duress or without the ability for the user to actually have a choice in the matter, right? So I do think there's lots of issues around consent, but I'm trying to focus on the good cop side, on the other benefits that come from these sorts of systems.
Thank you, Stephen. I actually would like to go back a little bit because I think it's really important. And what Mariana said in the end, we're looking at the user. In all of that, who do you think, Stephen, you alluded to who might benefit, but I really would like to come back to it for both of you. who would benefit most, and what knowledge do they actually need to have?
Okay, now I cannot place the bad cop, good cop story because the question, it was, you know, a brilliant lawyer question that is leading the answer. So I think that the platform in this sense has a certain number of benefits. First is lowering the costs for the consumer who wishes to enter into a negotiation and has no templates or no access to, let's say, highly qualified lawyers that would be maybe too expensive for the specific contract. So in some way, it is sort of automated help in negotiations by providing templates. So I can see a benefit for the consumer in that sense. I can also see a benefit for the companies because they can they can build a certain classification, a certain groups of clients and groups of contracts. So as long as you organize your activity in a systematic way and you try to create groups of and categories, then most likely you're lowering your cost of administration of those categories as well. And the more standardized you go, the less costly will be your business administration. So I would say it's a win-win from this perspective.
So, I think the platform answers the question also a little bit, right? And one thing that I find really interesting about this platform, can you hear me? Yeah. So one thing I find really interesting about this platform is, to me, what this is set up mostly to do is sort of relatively simple contracts, right? For sort of supply agreements, things that maybe survive and not so complicated. But where AI can really help is here. Is the performance milestone and data collection. This is performance. It's not just how do we write the contract, it's how do we analyze the performance of the contract. And when we really want to expand the user base to something like this, they call phase 3 analyze as part of phase 1. So you're preparing a contract that recognizes the performance obligations and goals of what phase 1 has. So then you have a much smarter, a much smarter contract in the sense of one that's attuned to the parties' sophisticated needs. And that's where I think we're moving, but we're not there yet. I mean, right now, this tends to be for simpler forms of contract and supply agreements, and we talk about access to people who otherwise can't afford it. I think more and more what we're doing is people who can afford it decide that AI helps them do this analysis first better, so then when they negotiate the terms, which is phase 1, they're actually building in, using AI, the predictions about performance and the needs they have on a contract that requires obligations on a one-off transaction. I tell you something once and that's ended, an ongoing relational contract. I think that's where this is interesting. I also think this is interesting because it doesn't have AI helping the dispute resolution phase. So when we have a dispute, we talked earlier about self-executing smart contracts or blockchain contracts where there's not an active dispute resolution. This doesn't envision this, right? It envisions, I think, some use of technology to streamline dispute resolution, but it's not using AI or blockchain as far as I can tell under this platform. No, I think that's Petra's. So I think what's also interesting when we talk about these different platforms is moving to using.
I'm so sorry.
It's
so disturbing.
So I actually think that's where we also, talking about these platforms, we're still early. All of this is early, right? We're just learning to use this stuff. There have been simple forms of platforms for a long time where there's just a library of forms, right? So you can go on and say, I want to do a supply contract, and we'll give you a menu of things that were recorded there that show. The idea of using AI or blockchain, we're still so early in the use, but I think that's thinking about this going forward. We only have AI here, right? And I think AI needs to be in phase 1. And then we have lots of things to talk about whether we want AI here. And for blockchain contracts, we may not care because it may be self-executing and easily resolved. And there's all sorts of interesting ways that we have to adjacent to blockchain contracts where we're using technology to solve disputes online or using communities to decide crypto asset disputes that we can talk about later. But what I find interesting about all this is the limited use of AI so far in this sort of platform, and where we can go to expand that with the limits of wanting informed consent. And the limits that AI have right now, which is mostly looking backwards to make predictions about the future rather than solving problems yet on its own. So systems right now are not so rules-based, figuring out how to get rules into the systems versus just making predictions based on looking at what people have done in the past.
Can I just ask you, like a little of an access to justice question here? I do agree with our discussion. My worry would be that certain parts of businesses, especially small and medium-sized businesses, at the moment at least, have in certain parts of the world will not have the capability and capacity to actually even access those kind of platforms and will not understand that and would be very easily driven into using, the library, like what you said at the beginning, Steve, what everybody else does. So from a lawyer's perspective, with an access to justice head-on, do you see also any danger in using those AI and those kind of platforms?
I will come back to the first part of the discussion afterwards because somehow it's connected. So, what is the justice doing? It was already somehow touched in the beginning. So first of all, you have to present evidence and a position. So you have to clearly articulate what you want, why do you think that you're right, and which is your evidence to someone. Then that someone, and so far, is the human right to be heard by another human being. So far is the social contract theory of what the state is, and we give delegation to somebody else as a human to have power over us and to force us to do something because it is a justice system in which we voluntarily enter. So this is the whole concept of what we are living nowadays. And then the third part, so first of all, we present to somebody who has authority, and that is a human being in a system. And then third, we have enforcement, which means unless we comply voluntarily with what was decided, it will be the force of somebody else, be it automated or being the state, I mean, taking money from the bank account or just putting your house on auction, that will enforce that decision over you. So all these three steps are under question mark whether we want to give them to an AI, because an AI, it's something that is built by people. So we may think that it is a human element there because it was drafted by a human, but also it is not somebody that you can enter into a genuine dialogue, because you can provide answers to questions, and I will speak about that tomorrow a little bit more. But the thing is that in this dialogue that you have with the AI, you are entering into a system that you cannot possibly change, because you can't change somebody else's, a human being, perspective. A person can say, aha, okay, so I'm actually thinking like a dictator, and I would like to think in a democratic way. I change my perspective over the world. An AI system will not say, aha, I throw away all the system in which I was built, and I will just embrace another political type of thinking completely. So that is one question. And then in the end, if I give authority to somebody over me, to enforce the decision over me, then it is a problem that we have to think, what is the definition of force? Because as with humans, we have some elements. If the police officer is coming to your house to throw you away, he knows exactly what he can and he cannot do. But if you have a big robot or a Robocop, like a human, with some elements of augmented, whatever forces it has, throwing you away, you might end up in a situation that you don't want to be. So where are the limits? I think that these limits are more sensitive than in other situations, and for that reason, for instance, the European Union has defined the use of AI in justice as high risk. That's my perspective as well.
So let me also, I think, be negative. There are huge value judgments baked into using AI in any form of platform dealing with contract formation or dispute resolution, because it's based right now on LLMs primarily, right? And that we heard in the earlier panel that we think that and I defer to all you, but that all publicly available information is now being sucked up into LLMs. What we're missing is that a lot of relevant stuff may not be publicly available digitalized, right? So we're talking here about forms of contract that are going to get more and more uniform, but they come from a certain system and they have certain value judgments baked into them. Petra does a lot of stuff in Pacific Islands. Their ways of forming agreements, their ways of resolving agreements are not available online in a way that an LLM model can learn, right? So when you use these things, you're reducing and making uniform the approach to contracting, to agreement, to consent, and you're picking a few systems, legal systems, values about how we reach agreement, how we police agreements, how we enforce agreements. And it's limiting, and it's limiting in lots of ways that have some efficiency benefits, if we want to make it all about efficiency, but also have huge problems because it eliminates choice and eliminates different cultures and different principles that different systems have. And it's a simple also, and one question I always struggle with, and this is more from a dispute resolution point of view, is there are different ways we approach dispute resolution, and I can be really crude about it. We have common law systems and civil law systems. Common law systems are built more on precedent. AI is really good at precedent. So we drive this to more of a common law driven approach. How do civil law systems work through AI? And then we start talking about countries where their legal systems are not available online. So one of the things we can use technology for is to bring some of those systems online. But I was talking to a colleague in Bangladesh recently. No one has digitalized the hundreds of thousands of court decisions in Bangladesh because there's no monetary incentive to do so, right? So that means AI can't suck that up. And so that means the Bangladesh approach, the contract law, the Bangladesh approach to decision making isn't available to our AI, right? And if we start then talking about small Pacific Island states, none of that stuff's available. So when we choose platforms like this, we are making huge value judgments for efficiency reasons, but without always thinking about the consequences. And that's before you get to biases into algorithms and all the issues that we're all thinking about, bias and how algorithms can reinforce bias. But we have to take a step back. What is in the publicly available information that AI is using to learn from? And there's huge things that are missing from that are highly relevant to reaching agreement and then performing those agreements and then enforcing those agreements.
Yes, one last word. Okay. Can I use the German word? Like a very complex one? Okay. Why I choose to play the bad cop? I would say that. I choose to play the bad cop because you need, at the end of everything, to have a perspective that is realistic. What realistic means? Risk assessment. What risk assessment means? It means that you have to cover yourself for those risky situations. Ignoring them, being mesmerized, it's like Fata Morgana. It's like the mirror, the mirage in the desert, which is a beautiful thing. But that mirage can help you also develop. For instance, you can develop the sailing, you can develop the spaceship, everything can be developed by a tree. So that's okay. But when you do risk assessment, then you do not place for the first flight on the moon a person or a group of 1,000 persons or a group of the whole mankind on a ship to moon. You first place a dog, then you place a human being, then you place 3 human beings, then you place 100, etc. So we have to understand that AI is in a prototype phase. As a prototype phase has to be treated with responsibility, and responsibility is the key word that the lawyer has in mind when looking at risk assessment. So for that reason, I think we can be useful to the technology community by doing risk assessment in order to help the community to build better prototypes and in the end to have the mass production of whatever technology is developed.
But look, I always say, I'll go back to Crenguta and say AI and blockchain is hugely helpful to access to justice, whether it's for contracting and enforcing those agreements, and also for lots of other things that are problems in terms of entering the legal system. And there's great examples of using AI to help with divorce settlements and people who just don't have understanding of their legal rights and an introduction to assessing what their legal rights are and identifying resources they can use to assist them. But we have to do all this with our eyes really wide open. And efficiency, sometimes we get ahead of value, and we need to figure out how we're keeping an eye on the value choices that are making these decisions.
Thank you very much for a very interesting discussion. We just